A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashim Yahushai, Ba'ashim Akakwadash, double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, back here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson is going to be a bit of an exhortation in regards to self-development and essentially not having the presence of a woman and looking at it through a different perspective. So essentially, for brothers who may not have a woman, it may not be the best thing for you at the moment, but looking at this absence essentially as an opportunity to get closer, to the Lord, for essentially self-development, making yourself more profitable, and these sorts of things, right? Because sometimes as young men, when we first, and I'm guilty of this, when we first learn that, our heritage, we learn about our true, biblical nationality, we learn about our own history, and so on and so forth, right? One of the things as young men, we make this mistake is that essentially we we start to try and bite off a lot more than we can chew. And one of those things that we can bite off a lot more than we can chew is the fact that we want to have a bunch of women, right? And although there's nothing wrong with a man having more than one, right? There's nothing wrong with that, and many of our forefathers have had that. But really and truly, this is more of just going through a bit of a shift in perspective. And if you don't have one, it's more also as an opportunity to do some self-reflection and some self-development, some self-examination, and even to reflect on a lot of your different situations and extract the nuggets, right, from certain things that you've gone through, because a lot of your experiences are very, very valuable and can be used to actually also to edify one another, right? Okay, let me just read this real quick. I just had a few precepts, and I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson is edifying, right? So this is Hebrews chapter 10 verse 24, and it says, "And let us consider one another and provoke unto love and to good works." And it says, "Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as ye see the day approaching," right? So essentially, it's also an opportunity to get closer, to the Lord, and get closer to, having these different conversations. And when you go into that word conversation in the etymology, it goes into essentially a manner of life. We go into and understand, look at the ways our forefathers conducted themselves, and even for mothers as well, and looking and examining and trying to extract a lot of nuggets, and having precious alone time, right? And learning and applying these things, to ourselves, right? Having these conversations, with elders, and and so on and so forth, right? Because this is the type of we want our essentially our behavior, to be essentially blameless, right? In the midst of a crooked, as Paul said, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, right? So not having a woman, it's this is just a shift in perspective to not look at it as a bad thing, right? Look at it as also an opportunity to capitalize on getting closer to the Lord, and understanding your own history and becoming a lot more profitable, right? Becoming a lot more well-rounded, right? Because sometimes as young men, we tie not just our self-worth to having a woman, but we tie, we start to feel or get ahead of ourselves, might, being around one, I should say, right? Um, so I want to bring in a couple precepts. I didn't have too many written down, but Lord's will, this lesson will be edifying. So let me start off here with the book of Ecclesiastes, and then I'll go into some things that Apostle Paul spoke about. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 7, excuse me, verse 16, and it says, "Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise. Why shouldest thou destroy thyself?" Right? So, why, if you're in a situation where, okay, like say for example, if you didn't have a job, right? you know if you didn't have a job, don't be over righteous to the point where you take and you're trying to have more than one woman at the same time, and you're trying to juggle that, and you don't actually have a job, right? Or you don't have a stable place, right? Or you don't have a lot of experience, right? Because sometimes, as young men, we will filled with a lot of zeal, a lot of enthusiasm, in regards to doing all these things, and these things may not be properly and conducive to your situation, right? So don't destroy your situation, just in the event where, okay, you can compromise your space, right? Because for some brothers, you may not be ready for that, right? And then we hear about certain stories, like, and then you compare yourself to other brothers that might have more experience. They may have a lot more experience in managing that, but that doesn't mean that you start to go and do that, because that actually might destroy yourself and your situation, right? So don't be over righteous, right? It's not unlawful, that's not what I'm saying, but don't take off and try and multiply and have all these women around you, and you have certain things that, okay, you're neglecting certain other things and certain important things as well, right? So just something to keep in mind, right, in terms of self-development. And because this world really, if there's anything that this world constantly pushes, it pushes entertainment, and it lacks the importance of self-reflection and self, you know what's the word I'm looking for, and humility, essentially. Because as the scriptures talk about how in these last days, men shall be lovers of themselves, right? So it's a mindset where people don't, the ways of the Lord are not actually, not only professed, they're not actually practiced, but they're not actually even being considered, right? Our people don't consider, right? And it says that in I think Isaiah, the first chapter. So let me go to some of the things that the Apostle Paul wrote and spoke about. This is First Corinthians chapter 7, verse 7, and it says, I'll start at verse 6, and it says, "And I speak this by permission and not of commandment, for I would that all men were even as I myself. But every man hath his proper gift of the Most High, and one after this manner, and another after that." Because the Apostle Paul, he was extremely dedicated, right? And you saw that. And not only that, it was also you also spoke about the different examples of the Lord taking him up and actually bringing him down. And one of the things, and I'll share this from from my little experience as well, when the Lord actually, when you read about a lot of the things the Apostle Paul actually went through, being abased, and when he talks about being abased and being abound, one of the things that I've noticed in going through your moments of suffering was that it equips you with the understanding, and when you go through the experience plus the actual taking apart and pulling apart those different experiences, one of the things it does, it better equips you for actually providing the guidance of actually dealing with a woman when you do have one, right? Because it's not, you don't also go through a lot of these things for no reason. It's also for your, essentially you suffer, but it's also for your self-development. It's not to your detriment. It just feels uncomfortable, right? But it's actually, as it says in Hebrews, no chastening seemeth to be grievous, but it yieldeth a peaceable fruit to of righteousness, to roughly paraphrase. And that's one of the things, me from speaking from experience, that it does when you don't actually have one. When you actually have that time alone with the Lord, and then essentially when you don't have one, it's, you're constantly and you're going up and down in terms of suffering, and you learn to deal with a lot of these different situations, so you're more knowledgeable, you're more equipped, you're more well-rounded, when you are placed in a situation when you do have a woman, right? So, and this is another thing, not to also attach your self-worth to having that, because as sometimes when you think about the culture, that this Babylonian culture that a lot of our men are part of, they tie their self-worth into in regards to these different possessions. And a woman is also, according to the scriptures, also a possession, right? He that gaineth a wife gaineth a possession, right? So that is one of the things that this culture it strongly pushes. Acquiring a lot of the external things, right? And finding self-worth in the external things, rather opposed to actually looking inward and developing the inward, as Paul said, putting off the outside man, or to put on therefore the elect, to roughly paraphrase, right? There is a lack of actually promoting the inner man within this culture, because people are very caught up into themselves and thinking that they're okay the way they are, right? So I'll read that again, and it says, I would even that all men were even as I myself, but every man hath a proper gift of the Most High, for one after this manner and another after that, right? So, and he outlines a lot of these different gifts in the 12th chapter, right? So I have brothers that might have different skills in regards to healing, in regards to actually interpretation of tongues, in regards to being a help, and that all those skills are very, very important. The spirit of maybe exhortation, maybe some brothers are very good at listening, right? So all these different, and not, this is why I'm saying this, when you don't have one, it's essentially also an opportunity to kind of do more self-reflection and improving yourself in that time. Think of it this way. I remember there was a show, if brothers ever seen the show, it's called Dragon Ball Z, right? And in the show they have this thing called the hyperbolic time chamber, where they were basically the character, they go in and they train, right? And they squeeze in a lot of training in a certain amount of time, right? But the point really is, they were most of the time they were by themselves, right? They were in a period of isolation, right? Kind of like how our forefather Joseph was in a period of isolation, prior to him actually being called out by the Pharaoh and being able to interpret, the Pharaoh's dream, right? In that scenario, he had an opportunity to be able to, self-develop and self-reflect, because it was just him. As a matter of fact, let me read that. I'll read a one precept from that, actually. think it's this is Genesis 39, verse 20, and it says, and Joseph's master took him and put him in prison in a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. But the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Shai was with Joseph, showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand and all the prisoners that were in prison, whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it, right? So Joseph was just in a period of isolation, right? So think of it as your own prison, so to speak, in terms of, you know, using it as an opportunity as self-development and self-reflection. So I'm going to go to here. This is Sirach chapter 39 and verse 1. I'm going to read down here, right? And it says, but he that giveth his mind to the law of the Most High, and is occupied in the meditation thereof, will seek out the wisdom of all the ancient, and be occupied in prophecies. He will keep the sayings of renowned men, and where subtle parables are, he will be there also. So understanding, you know, and the scriptures talk about, you know, being in the presence and being continually with godly men, right? You know, because it helps you to stay in tune in the spirit, and it also helps you to, you know, do a lot of self-reflection, because the scriptures also say the things that are written aforetime are also written for our learning, and our history is very and vastly important. Prophecies are important, right? You know, knowing these things that are coming to pass. So this is all part of our conversation. And it says here in verse 3, and he will seek out the secrets of grave sentences, and be conversant in dark parables. And he shall serve among great men, and appear before princes. And he will travel through strange countries, and he hath tried the good and the evil among men. And he will give his heart to resort early unto the Lord that made him, right? So this is the urgency also I wanted to also hit, because we see these things happening in the world. You know, for example, you see these things unfolding. You start to see the you know, as it says in Second Ezra, where it refers to a lot of sedition among men, you know, more and more time again, ever since 2020, and I kid you not, there's been a constant, what do you call that? Change in regards to how people are showing their displeasure towards their modern day kings and princes. So we're starting to see the unfolding of certain prophecies, you know, going on, right? We're starting to see that, you know, a lot of these people are essentially lovers of themselves rather than lovers of the Most High. We're starting to see that these different companies are pushed forward in their technological advances to push forth their MOTB, you know. So we're seeing a lot of these different things coming to pass. So what are we doing? We're making our supplication, right, unto the Lord, to begging them to actually have mercy upon us, and to have and give us favor and remember us in those times of trouble. You know, the prophet Habakkuk said, I've heard thy speech and was afraid, and in the times of wrath remember mercy, to roughly paraphrase, because that's really and truly what we need, right? And this is not a type of lesson to actually ignore the importance of having a woman, or for brothers that do have them, you know. But this is also looking at, this is also, you know, because it's all about perspective, really. It's all about perspective, because, you know, like they have a saying, you know, if you have a glass of water, right, is, you know, they always pose these different philosophical questions. Is the glass half full, or is it half empty, right? And I'm saying this to say that, you know, if, and I'm guilty of this, you know, because, you know, when you're younger, in a sense, you know, you look at situations that, man, you don't have one, and the Lord created, the woman, for the man, of course, right? um this isn't to knock the importance of women, but this is more of an exhortation as to, okay, if you don't have one, don't look at it as a detriment, because remember, it also says that our women will be harlots in the streets, right? So look at it as also an opportunity to capitalize on, right? To actually get closer to the Lord, right? Don't look at it as something that is something meant to break you. you know Look at it as an opportunity to make yourself more profitable, and to actually do more self-reflection, right? Because that's not the type of vibe that this society pushes. The society doesn't push the importance of looking inwardly. It doesn't push that. you know it pushes a vibration of, I'm good, it's all me. There's you know I'm a 10 out of 10, like, how these women think, like, right? So I'm going to continue on here. It says verse 5, and it says, and he will give his heart to resort early to the Lord that made him, and will pray before the Most High, and will open his mouth in prayer and make supplication for his sins, right? So we're in a situation where we're asking the Lord to have mercy upon us in these times of trouble, right? The scriptures say the end of all things is at hand, right? So, using it as an opportunity, seeing these things as well, having the vision, and then, having a sense of urgency to, to move with a certain sentiment of fear, because we know that judgment, teeth of wild beasts. It says that in I think it's in this chapter, actually. This the spirit's creative of vengeance. We see all these things, occurring more and more, right? The mirth of the land is disappearing, right? So all these different things, we want to have favor, with the Lord, and the Lord to remember us in a time of trouble, right? So I'll read verse 5 again, and it says, and he will give his heart early unto the Lord that made him, and will pray before the Most High, and will open his mouth in prayer and make supplication for his sins. Our forefather Nehemiah said, I and my fathers have sinned, right? So, promoting that sentiment of accountability and self-reflection, and trying to walk in a sense of integrity, right? So that's pretty much the point. I didn't want to, excuse me, go on too long, but this is also it's just a looking at it as an exhortation on changing your perspective in the way, we look at our situations sometimes, especially as younger brothers like myself, right? So I'll leave the lesson there, but I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.